Here in South Korea, concerns have surfaced over yet another possible urea shortage crisis. But the government is confident that there won't be a repeat of the problem seen 2 years ago. Let's turn to Professor Shim Myungkyu for more. Hello, Professor Shim.
Good morning.
The government has assured the public that there won't be a crisis like the one 2 years ago. Should we be relieved at the moment?
Well, while there is a negative shock in the market for the urea, I think the current situation is somewhat different from the crisis that we experienced 2 years ago. In 2021, the government and the private sector did not have enough inventory for urea because it was not anticipated before. According to the government, the urea reserve in Korea is now about 4 months of use. Given that the urea cannot be stored for a long time, this seems to relieve the concerns over the emergence of the urea shortage crisis. However, it should be noted that the government needs to watch the market very carefully because the market situation can become worse during winter.
Right, that's why South Korea tried to diversify the supply chain for urea 2 years ago to really lessen the country's dependence on China. Professor Shim, why is it that South Korea continues to rely so much on Beijing?
Yeah. As you pointed out, it is surprising that the supply chain of urea has not yet been diversified. Actually, the situation has become worse than before. In 2021, about 83% of the urea was imported from China, but it has increased to about 92% this year. It seems that low price is one of the main reasons behind the scene. In November, urea spot price in China was about $360, while that comes from Black Sea was about $390. Given that the transportation cost is also low when the urea is exported from China, it would not that easy for the farms to diversify their supply chains when they want to minimize the production cost.
Right. The answer is because it's so cheap to import urea from China. Professor Shim, as far as I understand, South Korea or firms here in South Korea do not have or produce raw materials for the production of urea. Then what solution should there be? I mean, should we be building factories that produce such raw materials?
Yeah, I think the one way as a permanent solution for this problem is to produce the urea in Korea, at least to some extent. In Japan, about 80% of ammonia, which is used for the urea, is produced within its territory, and another 20% of it is imported from the other countries like Indonesia. While it is usually argued that the production cost of urea is somewhat very high in Korea, I think that the production cost in Korea is somewhat comparable to that of Japan. So it would be possible to endogenize the urea production. I also think that the government can support the production through policies like subsidy to farms that produce the urea if the cost is really a burden for producing the urea in Korea.
Right. China is one cheap or more affordable option, but we can also turn to other countries for urea, countries like Vietnam, Japan, and Saudi Arabia, which South Korea has been doing, right?
Yeah. As you pointed out, China is not the only country that exports the urea. Excluding Russia, which is not a feasible option at this point, there are a lot of other countries that export urea. For instance, Qatar, Egypt export more of the urea than China does, if you look at the data. And there are also other countries such as Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Algeria that also export the urea. So I think it would be possible to diversify the portfolio if we have the will.
And issues over the supply chain, I'm sure, can be a headache for many other countries around the world. Professor Shim, are there any examples of other countries that have overcome supply chain issues like the one that South Korea has had 2 years ago and maybe now? How have other countries done this?
Well, I could find out there are two cases that experienced a similar kind of the negative shock in the urea market, in the market for urea. So Japan also had a similar issue in 2021, 2 years ago, but the shock was not as severe because Japan does produce the urea by itself, as I pointed out, and it imports the urea from several other countries like Australia, Indonesia, and Taiwan. It does not import the urea from China. So while there was a kind of the similar shock, the size was very small. And also Germany experienced the same kind of negative shock in the market, but they had some narrow shock, because the small shock, because they really do not depend on one particular country. So while there were some countries that shared the similar events, but the crisis that we experienced 2 years ago was not that common.
I see. Thanks so much for your insights this morning, Professor Shim. You have a great day.
Thank you too.